Good evening. As many of you may know, on the 21st of September of 2025, otherwise known as Sunday, I had the pleasure of a lifetime to attend the Charlie Kirk Memorial Service in Glendale, Arizona. An atmosphere not filled with anger and not filled with sorrow for Charlie Kirk, but with rejoicing for his life and his message, and also grace. So before we start this episode, and before I pray for the victims of the horrific ICE facility shooting yesterday, I want to share a little bit of the experience that I had regarding the Charlie Kirk Memorial. First of all, I think a key part of the memorial that I have to mention was the music. The entire memorial consisted of very great Christian artists, such as Chris Tomlin, Brandon Lake, and many other high names in gospel music, filled with songs which all of us may know, such as Holy Forever, The Blessing, and later, Amazing Grace in bagpipes, which in my own personal opinion is the best style of that song in the entire world. So, but you may have a different opinion, and I don't care. So, the biggest part of that memorial was not just the music, it was also the speeches. The memorial consisted of many high names, not only in politics, but also in the Christian community, such as Frank Turek, Tucker Carlson, J.D. Vance, Benny Johnson, President Donald Trump, and most importantly, which I want to take a little bit of time to highlight, Charlie Kirk's wife and new CEO of Turning Point USA, Erica Kirk. Erica, in her speech, highlighted exactly what it means to be a good Christian. She highlighted exactly Jesus' commandment to us that we ought to forgive our brother 77 times 7 times when she forgave the man, Tyler Robinson, who shot and killed her husband. When she did that, I gotta say from my own personal perspective, I was speechless. Because I could never imagine that she had the strength inside of her to forgive a man who caused her that much pain. However, she said that she forgave him, the 3 words, I forgive you, shortly after mentioning another story of grace and forgiveness, perhaps the biggest one in history, which that is of Jesus Christ. As Jesus was being nailed on the cross by people who hated him, who were yelling at him, telling him to calm down, what did he say to those people? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. This was not only a moment of eye-openings, ladies and gentlemen. This was a moment of grace, which we have not seen in quite some time. And honestly, for me, it was changing. Because after that speech, I started to look at people with different eyes. And hopefully throughout this episode, I hope you will take the same approach as me. However, being graceful regarding people does not mean being weak, which we will touch later. So before we start, I want to say a prayer for the victims of the horrific ICE facility shooting yesterday. 3 people were dead, as well as for Charlie and Erica's life. Heavenly Father, we come to you today to ask you for the lives of the 3 people who died in the horrible shooting in the ICE facility. Lord, I ask you, please, if the people knew you and accepted you in their hearts prior to their deaths, may they please be at your right hand. May this be done in your will, and may they be guarded by your presence, Lord. I want to thank you for Erica Kirk's life. Thank you for sending her to be such a great model of a Christian, and may Charlie be at your right hand. I ask you and I pray in the name of Jesus, amen. So when we are talking about the memorial, of course, we cannot forget the aftermath. The left wing, which unfortunately has become a common theme in this country and all of their shenanigans, could not help but try to ruin the atmosphere of grace, love, acceptance, and tolerance that we created in celebrating Charlie Kirk's life. They had to destroy it. And how did they try to do that? One day after, now disgraced former Rumble streamer and absolutely political loser, Stephen Bonnell III, also known as Destiny, launched the most despicable, disgusting, evil, and blatantly false tweet that I have ever seen from him, comparing the Charlie Kirk Memorial to a Nazi rally. Nice going at diffusing the tensions, Destiny. Really nice going. First of all, it is important to notice that the National Socialists, also known as Nazis, were not forgiving people, nor were they Christians. The Nazis were strong government advocates who prioritized race over anything, who prioritized the master race that they saw, the master race, the Aryan race, over everything. They did not follow God and his creation of humans in his own image, which grants us equality. They didn't follow that. Number two, the entire National Socialist or Nazi philosophy is about vengeance. It is about a vendetta against the people who caused them to lose their country, following the Treaty of Versailles, the end of World War I. So their entire political ideology was formed on that, destroying the people who have hurt us. That is not what you saw in any way coming from the people praying for Charlie's life. As a matter of fact, Erica forgiving her husband's killer and us applauding her for it and chanting Christ is King completely debunks any fake narrative that this was somehow a Nazi rally. I don't even understand why people even take it seriously at this point. It is clearly just a pathetic, disgusting, and vile attempt by the modern left to discredit a very well-constructed memorial for a man so special and so important to American politics. Which I say to them, because of you, 1 million Charlie Kirks have been created. And conservatives are not going to back down because you use violence to get your way. As a matter of fact, the United States government is now going to take action, just action, against anybody who threatens violence against conservatives, who has previously talked about harming conservatives, and who is conspiring with the terrorists who killed Charlie Kirk, who performed the latest ICE facility shooting, which we will talk about in a few minutes, who killed Irina Zaruska and who supported it, who glorified it, and most importantly, the two men, one dead, one who was just arrested and indicted and convicted, who attempted to assassinate President Trump. It is not without any doubt in my mind that this country now not only has a violence problem coming from the left wing, the party who claims to be for love for people, who claims to be for safety, and who claims to be for community. The same party is now involved in the greatest political violence crisis in the 21st century. Now, how could that be? Why is America so violent right now? Why are people making whether or not we should kill our political opponents even a political issue? There is one answer for that, ladies and gentlemen, and that is America, unfortunately, is undergoing a moral decline. You see, I watched a video by a great YouTuber by the name of Seamus, who has a channel called Freedom Tunes, you may know, where he asked the simple question: will we return to God the Father as a nation, or will we figure out that we do not have a father? Will this be the turning point for the United States of America, or will this be the point where we discover that America never had a father? And it is very important to touch on that word, father. Why? Because fathers are at the center, the epicenter of the moral decline in America. And this was said by Charlie Kirk. This was said by the Daily Wire. This was said by Aristotle. Fathers play a very important part in our society. And let me explain to you why. In the early philosophies of Aristotle, of Plato, of every ancient Greek philosopher who saw philosophy as a means to achieve the extreme happiness for their souls and to achieve virtue, The family has always been at the center core of society. The family has always been the most basic and fundamental, in that sense, unit of society. Why? Because it is through a family that a child learns discipline. It is through a family that a child learns virtue. It is through the family that a child learns morality. When you take away the families from society, when you make them only worship the government and not God, when you make politicians the leaders and not the parents, society enters a moral decline. Why? Because the government is there to enforce morally objective laws. It is not there and has never been there to create morality from zero. That is what the communist countries, such as the Soviet Union, such as Cuba, such as North Korea, such as Vietnam, and socialists now not as communists, but socialists such as Venezuela, have been trying to do. Completely set morality from scratch. And that, my friends, is evil. That, my friends, does not work. And I'll explain to you why. And this is something that people have been touching on very recently, and I would like to point out. If morality is not based on a higher power who is above not only human science, natural science, but human logic, then morality cannot and will not be objective. Let me ask you guys a question. Why is it morally wrong to steal? Why is it morally wrong to kill? Why is it morally wrong to set a house on fire? The answer is because there is a divine power above all human logic and the natural world who has created us in his image and showered us with rights according to him, and which does, if we violate, we are in direct violation of that divine being's law. That is why morality is objective. There is no other consistent way to explain it. And I just want to respond to a few people who are going to say, oh, but so are you saying that an atheist moral person is impossible? I'm not saying it's impossible. However, I am saying that an atheist does not have the standard to what moral philosophy is. And this, I go back to the interview Ben Shapiro just had with Bill Maher, which basically what happened was Bill Maher was like, oh, I'm an atheist and I am immoral, and you can't say because the Bible is full of evil and blah, blah. And Ben Shapiro said, we agree on morality around 86% of the time, which they do. Most people do. I think most people who are watching me, most people in America believe that murdering people is wrong all the time. Most people in America believe that stealing people is wrong all the time. Now, why do we agree 86% of the time? Ben Shapiro said, because we are in a country that since its founding in 1776 has emphasized objective moral values based on Christian writing, on Christian scripture. It was based on the United Kingdom, which has ties to the Anglican Church. Morality in the United States, it has a direct line that leads straight to God. And that is why Americans have the sense of objective morality, even though not all of them may be Christians. Now, if we would go back to other parts of the world, such as Saudi Arabia, where they behead people for being gay. If we go to Palestine, where they throw people off buildings for being gay, where they believe that it's okay to discriminate, and in many cases assault violently Jews and Christians, they have a different sense of morality than us. If we went back to Nazi Germany, they would have a different sense of morality than us. They would say that it's absolutely okay to murder Jews because they believe that these people are not as pure as them. So this idea that morality can be subjective and created out of nowhere and still be logically coherent and naturally coherent is absolutely not true. The only reason, I'll say it again, that we as a people can stand here today and be objectively moral the way that God wants us to be and a way that society functions is because we have ties and because we were founded by people who were followers of Christ. Not because our logic is so superior. Because guess what? When people start tying their logic to everything, that is where atheism happens, that is where murder happens, and that is where the demonization and declassification of humans begins. And this is a fact that if you look at any ancient philosopher, or any philosopher that's not Karl Marx because he's a total loser, if you read these people, you will see that it is absolutely true. Why? Because if truth exists always, and not just morality, it has to be based on a higher being. So why am I saying this? Why am I elaborating on objective morality regarding God? Because the left has turned us so far away from God that we, and I will go back to my main point, we have entered a moral decline. And why is this the left's fault? Because they have destroyed the American family. They are in the process of destroying the American family. And unfortunately for many people, unfortunately for them, and I feel sorry, unfortunately, the people who have most been affected by the left's campaign of the destruction of traditional values, of the destruction of the family, of the reorganization of human morality, are African Americans. Now, why is that the case? If you look at the rate of homicides in the United States, and this is a statistic used predominantly throughout not only the internet but also the intellectual world, African Americans, which are composed of 13% of the population, commit around 50% of the murder. Now, why is that? Systemic racism? Absolutely not. The problem with that, and this is why it's such a great example of the moral decline we're entering, and if we don't leave, we will go down the same path. The biggest cause for that is the destruction of the family. A study of 2013 showed that around 67% of African American households only have one parent. And today, around 50% of all African American children are in a house without a father. And around 90% of African American criminals, that same study said, were from a house that did not have a father at home. As a matter of fact, statistics show that without a father at home, women are 7 times more likely to become pregnant at a teenage age. People are twice more likely to commit crime. People are twice more likely to become victims. People are twice more likely to become poor. Now, why is that? Why is a father so important and vital for the development of society and for creating citizens who serve the nation? Because a father is the provider of the house. And I don't give a damn if people are going to call me a sexist saying that, oh, wives should submit to their husbands. That is not the point. This is not only biblical. This is scientific. The main role of a father in the household is and has always been to be the provider of the household. Not only the financial provider, not only to provide food, money, and things that are necessary to live, they are also the provider of discipline for their children. A father's role in the household is to educate children the way they should follow. Father's role in the household is to make sure that their children grow up to be exemplary citizens and not hoodlums, as to say. And unfortunately, many fathers have been, since the 1970s, failing at that role. As a matter of fact, non-coincidentally, the highest rate of fatherlessness for the Black community in our history happened in the 1990s. Coincidentally, at the time of the highest violent crime peak in our country. Why? Because the absence of a father at home, as I said before, is much more likely to create criminals than a loving mother and father relationship at home. Gangs are much more likely to be created in an environment there is no discipline, there is no objective morality, and there is no sense of right and wrong than the other. So yes, the ones to blame for that, for the moral decline and for the absence of the father at home, are the left wing. Why? Because for years they have adopted an ideology of feminism, which in its latest wave not only preaches that men are useless for the success of women, but also preaches that anybody can become a man, which biologically is false and has detrimental impact in society. They have taught women that pornography, which not only destroys a woman's moral character by objectifying them and causing people to see these same women not as a human being in the image of God, but as an object for sexual pleasure, it is also a drug to society, as it was proven scientifically that pornography has the same effect in our brain's pleasure system that a drug would do. It maximizes our pleasure system in a way we become addicted to it, in a way that destroys our lives, destroys our relationships. People who are addicted to porn are much more likely to become unproductive and never find a wife than people who don't for that reason. So when the left comes and says that pornography empowers women, it allows women to earn their life by making money, that is an absolute nonsensical and demonic statement. Why? Because I could easily make the same argument about drug dealers. So if porn empowers women to earn money through objectifying them, through making them lose their moral character, and by addicting a big part of society to become unproductive because of this evil drug, then that's the same thing with people who use their high IQ, because yes, a lot of these porn stars have the gift of beauty given to them by God. A lot of drug manufacturers have the gift of a high IQ. Because to manufacture drugs, you have to know chemistry pretty well. And what these people used to do, they choose their gift given by God to create something that's going to give them a lot of money, that's going to empower them in society at the expense of their moral character. They become responsible for the destruction of families. They become responsible for the death of innocent people. They become responsible for the murders of people, because guess what? A lot of death happens because of drug trafficking. A lot of blood is shed in Colombia and Mexico and the United States because of drug trafficking. So that argument makes no sense. And I want to ask you, what is more important? Earning money or preserving your moral value? What is more important? A temporary state of extreme wealth in this world, or eternal glorification with God? That is a legitimate question that I want you guys to answer in the comments, if you may. So, in conclusion, in that point, the left has completely not failed, because failure implies that their objective was not that to destroy a family and to destroy our society. It always was. When they introduced abortion, when Planned Parenthood was founded by a woman who wanted to directly kill African Americans, which is why she founded Planned Parenthood, that is very well documented, they wanted to destroy society. When the left wing made up with the lie that men were useless, that families were oppressive and imperialistic, or whatever, Lenin's talk, when the left came up with the idea that getting married was an act of oppression and that being a homosexual should be encouraged by society. And again, I'm not saying that there is anything... I'm not saying that I hate people who are homosexuals. However, there has to be a clear distinction between tolerating and loving people for who they are and condemning a behavior that is considered sinful, unnatural, and weakening to society. And the same thing happened when the left now recently not only started preaching that their political opponents are demons, now recently, not recently, but somewhat a few years ago, started preaching that anybody can change their gender. Their goal has to always been to destroy society. It has always been to marginalize people. It has always been to divide Americans. Why? Because they hate this country and what it stands for. So now touching back on the left, as we already described through facts which they're allergic to, why the left in America is so intolerant of our values and overall doesn't care about us, let's touch back to something that's been very prevalent recently, which is left-wing led violence. As we know, yesterday, there was a shooter, I forgot his name, Joshua John, there it is, Joshua John, a left-winger who engraved anti-ICE on his bullet, targeted ICE agents and missed, killing 3 detainees. Of course, did the left condemn this as an act of pure hatred and evil? No. They instantly jumped to the false excuse that the shooter was somehow a right-wing MAGA Republican who wanted to kill illegal immigrants. Are you kidding me? Regardless of the fact that he had anti-ICE engraved in his bullet, regardless of the fact that his social media profile picture was a hammer and a sickle flag, the left is going to go to extents never seen before in order to prove their fallacies, in order to, as Goebbels said, the Minister of Propaganda under Hitler, a lie is repeated so many times that it becomes truth. That is what the left has done. And let's look at a few more examples. The biggest one is obviously Charlie Kirk. The left, still to this day, especially regarding a little fellow by the name of Jimmy Kimmel, who got fired and now restated, let's touch on that before, who got fired temporarily from CBS for knowingly lying about the shooter in order to cause public harm. Because if you may not know, the FCC, which is the regulator company owned by the federal government regarding these media companies, has a rule that says that media companies are not allowed by law, to purposefully manipulate or create false information regarding a tragedy or event with the intent to create public harm. Now, what did Jimmy Kimmel say? He suggested that the MAGA Republicans were desperate to label Tyler Robinson, the shooter who killed Charlie Kirk, as something other than their own, basically implying without any evidence whatsoever that the shooter was a MAGA Republican. Not only is this a lie, there is zero evidence at all, zero evidence that he was a MAGA Republican. However, there is a multitude of evidence, and it's now been confirmed by the Utah police, that he was a far leftist. He engraved on his bullets, "Hey fascist catch." He watched furry porn in his pastime. His family and friends described him as not only the only left-wing member of the family, but also pretty left on everything. He was dating a transgender woman, also known as a man. This man was a left-winger. However, obviously, Jimmy Kimmel lied knowingly, or he is very mentally deranged, which makes him unfit to be a host. So he loses on both instances. And second, why did he say that? Because he wanted the public to turn against MAGA Republicans. He wanted to make you father at home. He wanted to make you, young Turning Point USA member like me, feel like you were responsible for the death of Charlie Kirk. And he wanted the left-wingers to find somebody else to hate other than evil people. So yes, he tried to create public harm by manipulating facts, by lying to his public. So yes, he did violate the law. As a matter of fact, the FCC chair has already called him out for it. And a lawsuit may be coming. Hope to God it does. However, the most disgusting part comes with the fact that now the left wants to portray themselves as the defenders of free speech, regardless of the fact that they were nowhere to be found when Tucker Carlson was fired for spreading his opinion. As a matter of fact, they contributed to it. They called for him to get fired. Never mind of the fact that mainstream Democratic politicians, such as Kamala Harris, such as Hillary Clinton, not only called Donald Trump a fascist and a Nazi respectfully, they also called for his Twitter account then to be banned. The same people who now are ranting and raging about violations of the freedom of speech, even though it clearly wasn't, it was just a violation of federal law decided by Congress, were nowhere to be found when the issue was on the other side. So that is not consistency, that's something called hypocrisy, which the left is very familiar with, for they live for that. So anyway, back to the ICE shooter. He was a leftist. He was absolutely a leftist. However, just like with Charlie Kirk, just like with the two men who tried to assassinate Donald Trump, the left is going to move heaven and earth in order to manipulate people to think that it wasn't one of them. They are going to ignore every single piece of evidence just to say that the shooter had either no real motive or was a right-wing extremist. However, I have a challenge for you. If it was a white man shooting a black man while yelling the N-word over and over again, do you really think that the left would be doing the same thing? No, they would jump to call that a hate crime on the first try, which is precisely, actually with less evidence, what they did to George Floyd. A junkie, a guy high on fentanyl who was killed by who died under a police officer with a common technique used by all police departments throughout the country in a Democratic-led state and city without any evidence of racial discrimination. The left not only called that the biggest hate crime in the 21st century, they rioted for an entire summer over it. So, from these people you would expect consistency, but you don't see any. As a matter of fact, you see recent hypocrisy too. At the death of Trey Reed, a black man who hanged himself outside Delta University in Mississippi, and who one random guy who had no idea who he was made up a false story that he had broken arms and legs in order to look like a lynching, who the medical examiner said was not the case, who the coroner said there was no evidence of broken arms and legs, who ruled out foul play on the first day, and whose autopsy also proved the theory that there was no foul play. In less than one day, the left jumped on that opportunity to call it a hate crime, to call it a modern-day lynch. It was false. It was a lie. And they will never apologize for pushing that lie. Why? Because they are shameless. Because they are manipulative. Because they are narcissistic. And they have always been, and they will always be that way. So back to the point. Of course, a few leftists are going to use a completely biased and overall miscreated study by the Anti-Defamation League, ADL, which I like to call the Anti-Detrimental Logic League, because they don't have any, which says right-wing violence is 70% of all extremists. I don't think anybody who's citing that study has actually read their methodology. So, being a very intellectually honest person, I'm gonna expose to you the truth about that. In one case where they labeled it as a far-right hate crime, it was one man who lost a custody battle, who burned his partner's wife's house, killing her, and who just so happened to have like an SS or a swastika tattoo on him. It was most of the hate crimes that the ADL labeled under that study were not actually hate crimes. They were just very horrible crimes, some of them even drug deal deaths, committed by people who just so happened to have Nazi tattoos. Well, guess what? If we are going to label crimes committed by people who just so happen to be leftists without no political motivation, without no political motivation, rightists, I mean, for those crimes, then why don't we label every single, like 50% of the murders are committed by a group that's around 90% Democratic? Why don't they do that? Because, and I am not saying that this should be allowed. It should not. Why? Because a person's political party does not define the content of their character. Their actions do. And if an action is motivated by extreme politics, it should be condemned as political terrorism. That was not the case with a majority of the right-wing extremist terror attacks. It was, however, the case with a majority of the recent left-wing extremist attacks. Thomas Crooks' attempted assassination of Trump, the other assassination of Trump, forgot the name of the guy, the recent Joshua Johns shooting of an ICE agent, Charlie Kirk's death by Tyler Robinson, these had all left-wing political motivations. And second point, that study in nowhere cited the over 20 people who died as a result of the Black Lives Matter riots in 2020. Now, if they want to cite people who just so happen to be white supremacists who committed murder, why didn't they cite deaths caused by riots, egged on, and by people who participated who were in the far left, funded by the far left, created by the far left, and performed by the far left, performed by Antifa, who I just want to take a moment and I want to applaud President Trump for finally making Antifa a terrorist organization. Of course, Democrats are going to make up the lie of, oh, they're an idea, they're not an organization. Well, they seem pretty organized to me. They organized protests, they organized uniforms, they buy guns, they have a central funding unit. They seem pretty organized to me, right? And this is my own, not my own personal view, this is common sense. But obviously, that doesn't go without saying that this is not because they're stupid. This is because they want to control you. So in conclusion to this video, I just want to finish with saying a few words. Fathers, educate your children. Love your children. And most importantly, support your wives. The key to a safe and prosperous society in the United States is a strong family. The key to good, hardworking, and exemplary citizens in the United States of America is a loving and productive household with both parents. Husbands and wives, you guys are one under the covenant of marriage. You guys are not in competition. Men and women, we are to add onto another, not to divide. American people, you are to fight against oppression. You are to love your neighbors just as Christ loved the church. And especially husbands, you are to love your wives just as Christ loved the church. We will never be able to defeat this death cult, this destruction cult, and this movement of such evil energy known as the far left if we are divided. So I say to you, most importantly, people my age, Gen Z, you are not the future of this country. You are the present of this country. When I went to the Charlie Kirk Memorial, I was not thinking, one day I will be engaged in politics. I am engaged in politics because this is my call. And I'm sure that a lot of people watching me right now have the same exact call. Fight for your country. Never let it be taken by people who want to lecture you on morality, yet endorse violence against you. Never let these people teach you how to be a loving person, yet hate everybody who disagrees with them. Stand up and fight. And I don't mean use violence. Do not stoop down to their level. Never stoop down to the left's level. We must show grace, yet we must never confuse grace with weakness. We must stand up for the truth, regardless of where it may be, and never compromise on it. We must have safe streets. We must have safe people. We must have traditional institutions and values which keeps us in a straight line towards God. That is how we make America great again. As I said before, it is not just by voting for Trump or Republicans. It is by constructing a productive society for all, not just for whites, not just for blacks, not just for Hispanics, for all Americans. Because we all bleed the red blood of patriots, and we are all created in the image of God. So thank you for watching. God bless you. And God bless the United States of America.